Have you ever stayed and finished a bad movie because you already paid for the tickets? Have you ever bought something from a shop you didn't really need since you were there already? Have you ever stayed in a relationship that wasn't really working out but you've been together for so long you think it'll eventually get better, but it doesn't and it spirals into marriage affairs, divorce, depression, and ultimately you go bankrupt while she takes the kids? Have you ever had one plate too many at a buffet since you didn't want to waste the cover you've already paid? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, then congratulations. You're a victim to the sunk cost bias like many of us. Now that we know that sunk cost bias happens on a daily basis and could possibly ruin your entire life, how does it work and how can we prevent it? Sunk cost bias or sunk cost fallacy can be seen as an escalation of commitment after we've invested time, money or effort into something. It happens on a cognitive level and we often justify our decisions with reasonings such as "I've already paid for this, might as well finish it." Researchers have found out that some personality traits can make you more resistant to sunk cost bias. There is one trait in particular that stands out and that is mindfulness. In 2014, 3 researchers set out to find if mindfulness meditation can help with reducing sunk cost bias, and the results are groundbreaking. Breathing exercises and yoga can teach you when to abandon sinking ships. Haefenbach-Guineas and Barsade hypothesized that resistance to sunk cost bias is affected by both temporal processes and emotional processes, and that focusing on the now and having less negative emotions makes people more resistant to sunk cost bias. Haefenbach et al. Conducted 4 researches in total. The first study was to see if there is a correlation between mindfulness and resistance to sunk cost bias. They recruited 173 Americans to participate and collected their data through Amazon. A mindful attention awareness scale was used for mindfulness, Rosenberg self-esteem scale for self-esteem, and a subsection in adult decision-making competence inventory titled Resisting Sunk Costs for measuring sunk cost bias. The results showed that mindfulness was positively correlated with resistance to sunk cost bias, and after controlling for age and self-esteem, the trait mindfulness was a predictor for resistance to sunk cost bias. The second study was all about the short-term state of mindfulness and its effects on resistance to sunk cost bias. The participants were 69.
Nice.
University students, although later only 57 took part in the study due to physical limitations. The participants were randomly assigned to 2 groups. Both groups listened to a 15-minute recorded induction. The mindfulness group listened to a script that induced, you guessed it, mindfulness. The mind-wandering, or the control group listened to a script that basically told them to think whatever that comes to their mind. Afterwards the groups were presented with the same question: you're a business owner, you just spent $200,000 on a printer. Your competitor just went bankrupt and is now selling their printer for $10,000. Their printer is 50% more effective than yours. You cannot resell your printer as it's kinda trash. You have $10,000 in savings. Do you, A, buy the printer, or B, don't buy the printer? If you chose A, you've successfully resisted the sunk cost bias. After answering, the participants also answered questions about how in touch they were with their body and breathing. And now, the results from study number 2. 78% of the participants in the mindfulness group resisted the sunk cost bias and reported a greater focus on their breathing and body. But only 44% of the participants in mind-wandering conditions resisted the sunk cost bias. The third study was based on the previous one, except the question measured how likely you succumb to the bias rather than resisting it. The participants were 109 university students and the procedures were identical, only difference being that the question they were given was different. The question goes something like this: you're the president of an aviation company. The company has decided to invest $10 million developing a radar-blank plane. After spending $9 million, a competitor made a better and cheaper plane. Do you pull out or do you spend the last $1 million to finish your project on your inferior plane? If you chose to finish your plane, you've succumbed to the sunk cost bias. Results were as you would expect. 53% of the mindfulness group resisted the sunk cost bias, whereas only 29% of the control group resisted. The goal of the final study is to see if negative affective states is decreased by mindfulness meditation. They took 156 university students and walked them through the same procedure as the third study, but also asked participants to take a 3-item survey to measure their focus on the future and the past, and then surveys to measure their negative affective states. The results were that people in the mindfulness group reported greater focus on the present moment, after bootstrapping the negative effects was the only significant mediator for the effects of mindfulness meditation on the sunk cost bias. That was a mouthful. So basically mindfulness meditation decreases focus on the past and the future, which decreases sunk cost bias. The main takeaway from this study is that even a brief 15-minute session of meditation can have large effects on sunk cost bias and perhaps prevent a large impulse buy that you can definitely not afford. So next time, before you're wondering if you should grab an extra item with your Amazon order because it's in a bundle and has a discount coupon, maybe go listen to 15 minutes of John Kabat-Zinn's Moutain meditation before making that decision.